Krystal, what are you taking a look at?
Well,
Name me one more nation, any other nation, that's doing as much as the United States to alleviate the pain and suffering of the people of Gaza. You can't. You just can't. The United States, through President Biden, is leading the effort to get trucks, food, water, medicine, and fuel into the people of Gaza. Wait. Name another nation that's doing as more than the United States to get hostages out or to get people, foreign nationals, out of Gaza. You can't do it. And name another nation that is doing more to urge our Israeli counterparts, to be as cautious and deliberate as they can be in the prosecution of their military operations. You can't. The United States is at the forefront of this.
That was NSC spokesman John Kirby in one of the greatest feats of gaslighting I have literally ever seen, positioning the U.S. as a great humanitarian savior, even as our bombs are being dropped on thousands of Palestinian babies. We are aiding and abetting a medieval siege, the worst massacre of civilians in modern history, the mass displacement of nearly the entire population of Gaza, what Nick Kristof is now calling Rwanda-level atrocities, and still have the gall to posture like we are humanity's last best hope. It is literally unreal, as in thoroughly disconnected from reality. If I spent the entire day, I could not possibly untangle all of the twisted delusions and outright lies that the US has pushed in order to justify the unjustifiable, and in order to wash the Biden administration's hands of the blood being spilled and chaos being sowed in Gaza and more broadly in the Middle East. But I wanted to spend a little bit of time today tackling some of the greatest absurdities being peddled from the White House and State Department podiums, taking apart the elaborate fairy tale that Biden and co. must push, lest they just admit that they are dedicated to helping Israel commit war crimes. So let's start with Mr. Kirby here. He says to name one nation that is doing as much as the US to alleviate the pain and suffering of the people of Gaza. As a starting point, how about literally every other member of the UN Security Council, all of whom voted for an immediate ceasefire and release of all hostages, save for the UK, which abstained? The US vetoed that resolution, making clear that our supposed concern for the hostages is just an empty pack of lies, and our alleged concern for civilians is even more of a cruel joke. More to the point, it is the height of insanity to claim you are the humanitarian savior of Palestinians for giving a little perfunctory lip service to concerns for civilians and sending in a few aid trucks, while your State Department is working feverishly to ship as many weapons and munitions as possible as fast as you can, knowing that these weapons are being used overwhelmingly to massacre Palestinian civilians. Moving on. How about we check in with the State Department? Their spokesman, Matthew Miller, is doing his absolute best to pretend that life for Palestinians in Gaza is anything but absolute hell on earth. Fresh off being rebuked as irresponsible by the IDF for suggesting that Hamas was not releasing hostages because they had been raped, Matthew Miller decided to give the residents of Gaza a little advice on how they could keep themselves and their families safe. Miller's guidance: just go to the UN-designated sites.
So where should people go?
People
what
should go.
Be the end?
So, let's take it one question at a time. Before you asked a question, let me answer.
Sure.
People should go to the UN designated sites that are on Israeli lists as deconfliction zones that should not be the target of military campaigns.
Now, listen to a UNICEF official on that very same day in response to a similar question about where people should go to be safe.
There is nowhere safe. This place is not safe. Under that table is not safe. Children in that hospital is not safe. There are no bunkers here that would offer a modicum of safety. It doesn't exist.
Nowhere is safe. Matthew Miller's fantasy in which UN-flagged facilities offer some sort of safe harbor was also just rebuked by the Secretary General of the UN itself, who wrote in a statement, quote, "The people of Gaza are being told to move like human pinballs, ricocheting between ever smaller slivers of the South without any of the basics for survival. But nowhere in Gaza is safe. At least 88 UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East shelters have been hit, killing over 270 people and injuring over 900. In another exchange, Miller was confronted with the actual horrors that our government is standing firmly behind, and it gets a little uncomfortable for him. This fairy tale of safe zones and humanitarian assistance collapsing, he reaches for the only other option, pleading ignorance.
There was a report that Israel's assault forced a nurse to leave babies behind. They were found decomposing. Are you aware of the story?
I am aware of that report, Saeed.
And do you take it as it happened, or if it did happen, is that a war crime?
Saeed, I would say that is a tragedy. It's a tragedy for those babies.
Right.
It's a tragedy for their family members.
Right.
It's a tragedy for the Palestinian people, and it is a tragedy for the world. It is why we have made clear that far too many Palestinians have been killed in this conflict, and that, of course, includes far too many Palestinian children and, of course, Palestinian babies. And it is why we have taken every measure we could to speak loudly and clearly to the government of Israel that it needs to do everything it can to minimize civilian harm. And it's why we have worked to try and move humanitarian assistance in. And it is also why I will say we have said that Hamas should stop hiding its fighters in hospitals.
I'm talking about this particular incident.
It gets to the very difficult nature of this war,
Right.
And the immense human tragedy that has been inflicted on far too many people.
But if it happened, it's not a war crime, or is it a war crime?
So I'm never going to be able to make an assessment here. You saw us today make a conclusion about war crimes after a very deliberate fact-finding process where we then apply the fact of the law. It's not something I can do responding to a
will the
report.
US do a fact-finding?
Just please let me finish my answers before you interrupt. I will take all of your questions.
Sure.
It is not something I can do responding to a report from the podium.
Amazingly, on that very same day that Miller pled ignorance, the State Department did miraculously remember what war crimes actually are, sending out this tweet announcing they had determined the Sudanese armed forces had committed war crimes and ethnic cleansing in Sudan. Wow, perhaps they can use these new powers to figure out the immensely complicated riddle of whether premature babies in the NICU are legitimate military targets. Now, to complete our partial exploration of U.S. fairy tales, fantasies, and outright falsehoods, let's go back to where we started, because John Kirby has been routinely turning in Oscar-winning performances in defense of the Israeli government. Just take a listen to this one.
It is not the Israeli Defense Forces strategy to kill innocent people. It's happening, I admit that. Each one's a tragedy, but it's not like the Israelis are sitting around every morning and saying, hey, how many more civilians can we kill today? Let's go bomb a school or a hospital or a residential building and cause civilian casualties. They're not doing that. They're trying to go after Hamas, and it's a very difficult task. When Hamas, oh, by the way, in addition to deliberately slaughtering people, is deliberately hiding themselves in residential buildings, in hospitals, in tunnels, putting the innocent people of Gaza directly in the crossfire. Now, you tell me, is that right?
Peddling oh so many lies in such a short period of time, it's almost impressive, frankly. First claim from Kirby, quote, "It is not the IDF strategy to kill innocent people." Actually, it is. This is blindingly, undeniably obvious if you just look at the death toll. The very lowest civilian death rate estimate I have seen comes from an Israeli university study which published in Haaretz, which found that 60% of all deaths in Gaza were civilians. Other estimates have placed that number closer to 80 or 90%. But even taking the low number, it would be significantly higher than the civilian death toll of all 20th century conflicts combined. That includes, of course, infamously brutal wars like World War I, World War II, Vietnam, etc. What's more, this same Israeli study confirmed the reporting of 9/7/2, which found that yes, in fact, Israel is intentionally bombing civilians in hopes of creating a, quote, shock that would turn the population on Hamas. So when Kirby says, quote, "It's not like the Israelis are sitting around every morning and saying, hey, how many more civilians can we kill today? Let's go bomb a school or a hospital or a residential building and just cause civilian casualties," they actually literally are doing that. Kirby goes on to say what the Israelis are actually doing is hunting Hamas. This may be the biggest fairy tale of them all. Adam Johnson lays this out well in his new piece for The Nation. The hunt for Hamas narrative is obscuring Israel's real plans for Gaza. In it, he asks us to consider the hunt for Hamas narrative that surrounded the attack, for example, on Al-Shifa Hospital. We were told Al-Shifa was the beating heart of Hamas HQ, complete with this computer-generated image of Hamas Command and Control Center, Dr. Evil-style lair where Hamas leaders, militants, and hostages could all be located. In the end, the IDF was able to produce roughly a dozen guns, one tunnel shaft, and a box of dates. And then everyone moved on to Khan Yunis, which we are now told is the real Hamas HQ. As Johnson writes, quote, "Looking at Israeli attacks through a counter-terror lens makes Israel's military decision seem perplexing. Why would Israel attack a hospital if it didn't think it was a Hamas command center? The Israeli military has shelled and attacked a number of hospitals, most of which it didn't even bother to claim were Hamas military bases. This is because the hunt for Hamas framework continually adopted by U.S. media is the wrong framework. The government is doing forcible population transfers, and this means everyone. It's the simplest way to explain Israel's actions, yet American media, tied to counter-terror narratives, can't or won't get their minds around the obvious fact that Israel is attempting to depopulate Gaza in stages. Not to mention, given the high rate of civilian death, Israel is without a doubt creating more Hamas militants than they are destroying. Taken together, the U.S. is mounting an all-out assault on reality in order to continue to justify our unconditional, no red line support for Bibi's war on Gaza. The impossible and failing nature of perpetuating this elaborate mythology is why they resorted to increasingly desperate distractions. Oh my God, it's TikTok. Oh my God, a rally chant made someone somewhere feel unsafe. Oh my God, a university president actually stood up for free speech. Can't have any of that free speech lest someone actually tells the truth. And the level of gaslighting here has...
Hey guys, if you want to see what I had to say to Krystal's monologue, not just this one, all of them, going back to the very beginning, become a premium subscriber today, breakingpoints.com.